Welcome back to RGR. This is Matt Derrick. I'm Ryan Tracy, and we're going to pick up where we left off before if we both, make sure that we can speak still. How are you, Matt?
I'm doing well, Ryan. Thank you.
We were on Locked On Chiefs earlier in the week, and I want to kind of pick up a couple of wrinkles where we had the offensive line discussion. And there's a lot going on, but one of the things that you mentioned in that piece was the shift, intentional or otherwise, towards more of a mauling type offensive line. I think that's a nice byproduct. But if it does work out that way and Andy decides to run more power, we've seen him do it in the past, especially where he can get guards in motion. I think he likes that. A couple of wrinkles to me, and I want your take. What does that do not only for Clyde himself being, changing aspects of what he has to do on a play-to-play basis in year two, and the fact that he doesn't have an experienced running back coach coaching him now, as Greg Lewis moves over to take on the running back position, does that cause any concern for you in making that switch right now?
Largely it doesn't. I mean, and part of that is because of just how the Chiefs coaching staff is really sculpted. I mean, it helps that he's got a running back as an offensive coordinator. I mean, Eric Bieniemy, give him a lot of credit for what the Chiefs scheme up to do in the run game. I mean, Andy Reid's still the architect, but Eric Bieniemy's got a big voice in that run game and what the Chiefs do. And he's very effective. I mean, Eric Bieniemy, I think, is one of the best in the league, especially when it comes up to working with the running backs and designing up how to work with them and to get them involved. And I think that what the Chiefs are certainly trying to do on that offensive line is, it's to build up an offensive line that can't always not only just protect from Mahomes, but absolutely open up some holes for Clyde Edwards-Helaire. You talk about his talking. I can't talk today.
Holmes too.
Get
a double wide in
there. But with Greg Lewis moving to that running back room, I mean, I see it being an upside for Edwards-Helaire, because I think that Greg Lewis can give him some more tools as how to work as a receiver. I mean, that was the one thing I thought even last season that, was clearly the area that the Chiefs wanted to find a way to get, Edwards-Helaire more involved with this year, was the passing game. I mean, they feel like this is a guy that can absolutely be a disruptive factor as a pass catcher. And Greg Lewis can help him get there. I look back once again. I mean, Edwards-Helaire is a rookie. I saw him, I felt like, take a lot of 1 yard losses or 2 yard gains and turn them into 6 and 8 yard gains. And what you're hoping that this offensive line is going to let him do is take 8 yard gains and turn them into 31. And that's what we just didn't see a lot last year. So I see, from a coaching standpoint, I think that, between Bieniemy and Reid, I mean, I think he's still got the tools that he needs. I think that the Chiefs feel like he's a pretty finished product as a runner, but I think that they feel like the ceiling for him as a pass catcher is so much higher.
That's interesting to me, because that makes me wonder, with Lewis working with him day in, day out, like releases come to mind. It makes me wonder if we couldn't see, just particularly based on development, see him split out a lot more. I know that they tried that early. He did it a lot at LSU, and I feel like that was another thing that was like, fit into our offense in year one. We'll talk about expanding your role or working off of what you do in year two, and maybe that's something that we could see.
I think absolutely. And, and we talked about the fact that, there was a lot of things that he did at LSU, and splitting out to one of them, it would made him a great receiving back in college. But let's be realistic. I mean, even in it's the SEC, it's still college. What you can do, especially if you're a running back lining up against an NFL safety or a corner, even an NFL linebacker, it's not the same as a college guy. I mean, you can't just beat those guys purely with athleticism. You've got to have technique. You've got to be solid in your route running. I mean, you can't just do it purely with athleticism. And I saw a lot of athleticism in Clyde Edwards-Helaire in college. He just beat guys because he was faster and quicker than they were. And that doesn't always work in the NFL. I mean, in the NFL, you've got to be able to get open. And I think that's where Greg Lewis can absolutely help him. I mean, and that's why I think that they feel like there's a huge ceiling there. The talent's there. He just needs, more technique, be a little bit tighter in what he does. And if he picks that up, I mean, you look at what he did as a rookie. I mean, clearly, I think that there's a lot more room for him to grow.
I tend to agree, and I'm really interested to see what that relationship with the staff does and the change, because not all players respond well to change. So I think that's going to be intriguing. that takes me the next step. And the other thing that we should cover, the reverse of that, for the wide receiver group, they're losing their position coach, a guy that they're used to, a guy that they understand not only what he wants, but how he coaches them to get what they want. Blameyer going over to the wide receiver group seems, obviously, you want to get a little bit of diversity in the position that you deal with. Makes perfect sense to me, but how do you see that change for that position group?
Yeah, Joe Blameyer going into wide receiver is really intriguing to me. I mean, that is his coaching background. He was a wide receiver coming up. So he's certainly got that skill. I mean, he understands the position. It's nothing that's new to him. But he's not exactly like Greg Lewis. I mean, Greg Lewis came to that wide receiver position coach, having played in the league and been an effective wide receiver. I mean, he knew how to, what it meant to be lining up across guys and how you beat them. I mean, he could explain that to the players. To me, I mean, and I've said this before, I think that with the amount of time that NFL coaches and position coaches specifically get with players these days, I don't know that there's a whole lot that position coaches can do to significantly make a wide receiver better unless they want to get better and they do the work on their own. And the reason why I think Blameyer's a really interesting choice is because Joe Blameyer's, the last few years has been a film guy. I mean, he's really been the person that Andy Reid leans on for ideas. I mean, a lot of the creativity that they've come up with offensively over the last few years has been Joe Blameyer going out and finding the film and showing it to Andy. And whether it's Rose Bowl right or even looking at high school film and saying, you know what, there's this coach out in the middle of nowhere doing this. You got to see this. But even then breaking it down for the players. And that's where I think that it's really interesting to me to see, because I could see Blameyer being that kind of coach that is coming into a position saying, hey, look, you know what, Tyreek, you work with your coaches on your own. You work out during the season. You've got that. Where, and Andy Reid talks about what's that one thing that a coach can do to make you better. And I really think that the thing that Blameyer can give to these guys is, helping them understand the competition a little better, whether it's just knowing guys' weaknesses around the league, seeing what's on the film, showing it to them, illustrating how they can attack guys more effectively, and even a little bit of self-scouting, to see what maybe their tells are, maybe what are the things that they need to clean up. Those are the things that I think of, especially at the receiver position coach in the league these days. I think that's probably more valuable than just teaching pure technique, because I will contend that if you're an NFL receiver and you're not working on techniques and routes and abilities to beat people 12 months out of the year, which means doing it on your own with your own coaches, you're not going to do it in the league successfully, consistently.
Yeah, it makes it that much harder. And it's interesting that you bring up the film, because what I'm looking for him to bring to the table is for two players in particular, and McCole Hardman and Cornell Powell now, two guys that need to be able to sight adjust, need to be able to understand and read the defense as they're deployed. And I'm hoping that all that film work and all that perspective coming new into the room might actually help them progress in that way. We know McCole needs to, and I know it's always a leap for a rookie, but those are the two guys that I really want to see if he can take them under the wing and really get some progress out of them.
I am too. And, and this is a little tiny thing, but it kind of perked my ears, earlier this week when we started learning a little bit about the coaching interns the Chiefs had brought in, because one of the guys they brought in is LaDainian Washington, who, was a former receiver in the league, former receiver at Mizzou. And honestly, I mean, LaDainian Washington wasn't necessarily the most talented guy, but he got a lot out of his talent and was, I think really kind of pushed the boundaries. I think he's the kind of guy who can make a good coach. But I'll tell you what, LaDainian Washington's a really good guy to have hanging around Cornell Powell during OTAs, during training camp. I think it'd be, because that's how Andy Reid loves to use these guys, to be able to use them as just, even if it's just a my guy coach, being the kind of player who can just hang around a player all the time. And if that's what, Washington's role as a coaching intern is, just working with Cornell Powell and sharing a little bit with him and being a guy that you can bounce things off of. I mean, I think that's just another tool, but I think you're absolutely right. I mean, Powell is a guy that, definitely I think can benefit from some coaching, and there's a lot of opportunities there. And if as many resources they're able to put around him in his first year, I think that's only going to help him.
Yeah. Makes sense to me. On the other side of the ball, I think the guy that has done probably the most with the least in progressing players outside of Chris Jones is Brendan Daly. And now I think the focus for him has to shift from the interior of the D-line out to the edges to get Frank some help. Lot of young talent there. Really liked what we saw from Taco Charlton. In terms of producing pressure per snap when he was on the field, he was number one on this roster last season. I've run all the numbers. But for me, it's about making that developmental stretch. And so do you think that they will concentrate more on the young guys, Kendo obviously being a draft pick, on the outside edge and Daly spending more time with those guys?
Yeah, I think you're right because, I mean, if you look at it now, the Chiefs have a really deep veteran tackle group that is pretty set. I mean, those guys know what they're doing. I mean, they got some pros now, really 3-4 deep that they feel pretty good with that rotation. You're right. I mean, the edge position is where they've got the most youth, and they've got some guys that, like Taco Charlton that, just, once again, they're just trying to see what's untapped there. There was a lot of athletic talent there. They're just trying to tap something into it that maybe some other teams have missed out on. But especially with Kendo and Dana, I mean, both those guys, I mean, two young guys that, I mean, I think that they can do a lot with. So I think you're right. I mean, that to me is going to be Brendan Daly's biggest job this year, is that edge position and working with those guys. We've talked about him before. Clint Flagel is, the outside linebackers coach. I'm wondering if he helps out a little bit there too. I mean, as far as, working with those guys, we talked about Flagel. Maybe he's the guy that's there to really help out with the young guys in that linebacker group with Nick Bolton and Willie Gay too. But, I mean, Daly's got, it's really the biggest position group on that defense. He's got the most guys to work with, and not that he can't do it, but I mean, if he needs to focus a little bit more on those edge guys this year and needs a little bit of help, I mean, I think there's some guys on the staff that can do that. But I think you're right. I mean, the biggest challenge for Brendan Daly this year is really how to squeeze more and develop that edge group, because that's where I think the untapped potential for this defense is.
It's interesting that you bring up Jolie and the linebacker aspect of it. It doesn't escape my mind that Kando's wearing 59. Now, that might not be permanent. It might just be preseason. That's fine. But he rushed from a 2-point a lot in college. Honestly, I think sometimes he played better in that position than he did with his hand in the dirt. So do you think that we could see, obviously, I don't think they're going to change their aspect of being a 4-man front, but could we see more NASCAR? Could we see more standing pass rushers in this defense this year?
I think we could. And you know what? And maybe we are completely reading too much into it, but I had the exact same reaction you did when I saw Kendo wearing 59. I mean, I know there's a little more that we got the new liberal rules on position numbers and everything, but still, that was a really interesting number to see on a guy that you would expect to be in the defensive line group. And they're still calling him a defensive lineman, but you know what? There's a fine line between an edge and an outside linebacker.
Yeah.
And a little bit more blurred at a 3-4, but even in a 4-3,
I think it's.
So I think you're right. I mean, I think, and especially because you look at Kando's kind of talent and what he has, and maybe what the Chiefs have along the defensive line elsewhere, and particularly what they could get out of him in year one. Yeah, I mean, I think you're probably talking about exactly the kind of limited role that might really fit his tool set.
One last thing, as we go through this week. The first official OTAs, and as we look at this, is there any one player on the defensive side that is a long shot, or somebody new that's down the roster that you think might have a shot at making some noise that you want to pay particular attention to?
There's a few of them. I mean, I think that to me, the most intriguing names, especially if you're talking about the undrafted guys, are all defensive backs. I mean, I think there's some really interesting names in that group. I mean, I think Marlon Character's interesting. Devin Key, I think, even DiCaprio Boodle. I mean, I think there's I would not be surprised if an undrafted defensive back made this team. And honestly, I wouldn't necessarily be surprised that there's two. I mean, we've joked about it. I joked about it on draft night. Zane Anderson sure looks like Dan Sorensen 2.0. So,
was he listed as a DB though? I thought they listed him at LB.
He's I have to go back and look at what BYU listed him as, like a safety linebacker or a defensive line back. I mean, it was some weird position that they listed him as, but his size, no, he's not. There's no way he's playing linebacker.
No. I just find it interesting. I think it's going to be a good time, folks. We'll have updates for you as we go through. Thanks for checking this one. Thanks for the time today, Matt. Appreciate it.
Thanks, Ryan. Take care.
We'll catch you guys next time.
Thanks for watching this video from the team at RGR Football. Click these videos to see more and subscribe to RGR Football.